Hello, good evening. My name is David Hutchinson. I'm the Assistant Director for Capital and Asset Management with the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget for the City of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the first of our 3 2021 capital budget public meetings. There's 2 main goals with these meetings. One is so that city residents can learn about how the capital budget is created. The other is so that the city can get input from the public on what they want included in the capital budget for 2021. If you've been to our meetings before, in years past, unfortunately, due to working from home and other restrictions, we are switching up the format. So our old format, we would have 2 kind of citywide meetings that talked about the entire capital budget. We moved the meetings around to different neighborhoods year after year to make sure that we had geographic diversity. And we followed a really great format called deliberative democracy that's really been pioneered by Robert Cavalier at Carnegie Mellon. It included small group discussions, 3 really important discussion questions, moderated table discussions where you got the opportunity to learn from your neighbors and people from other communities about how they interact with capital budget infrastructure. We also have childcare and pierogies normally at those meetings. Unfortunately, this year you'll have to make the pierogies at home yourself. We're switching to 3 digital meetings this year. The good news is it offers us an opportunity to really dive a little bit deeper on some of the key portions of the capital budget. So for example, tonight's meeting, we're gonna focus on transportation projects. We have some great subject matter experts that we're gonna have some information presented from in just a little bit. You'll have the opportunity to ask them questions as well. If you enjoy this meeting, we're gonna be sharing it to YouTube in a day or 2, so you can share it to anybody else in social media, things like that, so they can experience the same meeting. And I also wanna extend a sincere thank you to the Office of Community Affairs, the Department of Innovation and Performance, our interpreter, Nick Miller, who's on the call with us right now. This is all kind of a learning experience for everybody, but they've really been great partners in getting these meetings off the ground. So 2 notes about Nick to make sure that we can see him is that you want to make sure that your audio is muted and your video is turned off. That'll help make sure that Nick kind of rises to the top for a lot of people's views. Also, city people, government people are notorious for overusing acronyms. So if you hear something that you don't recognize, feel free to just type out a comment and I'll try to address it. My 2020 New Year's resolution is less acronyms, so please hold me to that. At this point, I just want to do a quick accessibility check to make sure that everybody can hear me or if there's any issues that we can resolve now before we get too deep into the meeting. Okay, sounds good. So for tonight's itinerary, there's kind of 4 parts to the meeting. I'm going to do maybe a 10 or 15-minute overview of the capital budget process. Then we're going to get a presentation with some amazing pictures. It's not going to be all charts and text. From the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, they're going to explain some great details on the big projects that you may be seeing in the capital budget from their department. We're also going to have a question and answer session where you can ask questions about the capital budget process itself or questions about specifically Department of Mobility and Infrastructure projects. And then we're going to wrap up with some further opportunities for input. This is definitely not your last chance to have your voice heard in the development of the 2021 capital budget. For tonight's meeting, we're looking for a few really important outcomes. One is survey results. At the end of the meeting, we're going to ask you to complete a quick survey that includes what you want to see in the capital budget. We take that information and we actually publish it as part of the capital budget. And we also share it with departments and city council offices. This is really important because sometimes we get project ideas exactly from this kind of input. We also have to provide that information for council and for the mayor's office so they understand where the public support is for various projects. Also, your questions for the expert panel also provide a great opportunity for the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to maybe rethink some things or develop a new proposal based on input from this meeting. And of course, everything again is going to be shared with City Council office and published on YouTube. So first, we want to talk about the 2 budgets that the city has. The operating budget takes care of a lot of the day-to-day expenses that the city pays for. Those can be employee salaries and benefits, things like uniforms, office supplies, utility bills for our facilities. The capital budget that we're going to discuss tonight is really more about the built environment. It's the physical infrastructure that the city owns and operates. Things like streets, sidewalks, parks, pools, playgrounds, bridges, ball fields, all that good stuff. If you're on the city's website and you're looking at the budgets, they also have different covers. The operating budget has, you know, this kind of lovely scene from Washington's Landing. I think our budget is a little bit more dynamic. We get this kind of Avengers scene, which I definitely appreciate. So thank you, Bill Urbanic, for giving us the cool cover on that one. The capital budget itself, it's important to keep in mind, even though we're discussing 2021, it really extends for 6 years. Larger projects can take millions of dollars and multiple years to complete. So we build what's called a CIP, or Capital Improvement Plan. It's really a series of 6-year plans related to specific projects kind of stacked on top of each other that gives us a better picture of how we intend to spend money for each individual project in the future. The capital budget timeline, we're kind of smack in the middle of it. In April, we had the mayor release their priorities. Our office, the Office of Management and Budget, released the request for proposals, the proposal form, in May. Right now, we're going through our public hearings. We want public input, so we're going to have 3 of those. And then in July, the departments and council offices can submit their proposals. The process of developing the capital budget is really driven by the Capital Program Facilitation Committee. That includes members of the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget, the City Council Budget Office, the Controller's Office, and directors from departments that carry out capital projects, like Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, Public Works. And we also have council representation from a couple of city council members themselves on the CPFC. So speaking of the mayor's budget priorities, these are in no particular order. They're really meant to inspire proposal ideas from department leadership. The priorities are the guiding values for the capital budget process. So they're set by the mayor. They help the departments understand what the mayor is looking for, and they're shared with department directors, council offices pretty early in the capital budget process. Today, we're going to be asking you to think about these priorities and whether you believe there are additional values that should guide how the city invests in its infrastructure. In lieu of reading through the specific descriptions for each priority, I'm going to show you later on in the survey how you can read through them all and give your own rating of their importance to you personally. The capital budget proposal form, like I said, was released in May. There's some really important information that we ask for from the departments. We're money people, so we of course want to know what the projects are going to cost, not just in 2021, but the out years. A lot of our bigger projects, especially the things that DOMI works on, may have 1 year for planning, 1 or 2 years for design, 2 to 4 years for construction. So it's really important that we understand that by committing to this planning project, we're also committing to the construction a few years down the line. We also want to make sure that the projects are justified. We want to hear in the department's words or in the council office's words, kind of why that project is so necessary. Additionally, we ask for the operating budget impact of a capital budget proposal. Or the chemicals or the maintenance to keep that pool going. We also have some projects that really help us save money on the operating budget. We've had some great technology improvements recently that reduce the amount of labor that we need to do things like open envelopes. So we're able to get those kind of projects in that have a true positive operating budget impact. We want to make sure that departments are able to call out those details. In terms of how the Capital Program Facilitation Committee evaluates proposals, there's actually 8 scoring categories that are mandated by city code. If you want to find out more information about that, you can check out chapter 218 of city code. Once the departments and city council have submitted the proposals, they're all evaluated and scored by a subset of that Capital Program Facilitation Committee that includes members of the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget, including myself, 2 members from Council Budget Office, including Bill Urbanic, and a member from the Controller's Office. The team scores all the proposals that we receive against the criteria on the screen, and then I sort the scores from highest to lowest. I apply this year's funding constraints because unfortunately we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do, so we have to make some tough decisions. And then those projects are ranked. The mayor and city council both receive those project rankings. And then taking those rankings into consideration, the mayor then introduces a preliminary budget in September. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Director Ricks with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you, David. Hopefully you all can see my screen. So I'm the director of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Also online with us is Michael Malik, who is the lead project manager for our signal infrastructure. And currently, thanks to the happy event of a recent birth in our department, he's also serving as a stunt double acting municipal traffic engineer for the city. So we can discuss more about traffic as we get into the questions for panelists. I'm going to try and move my screen forward. There we go. The mission of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is here. We take as our mission to provide the physical mobility necessary to support the social and economic mobility of the people of Pittsburgh through the management, design, improvement, and operation of the public rights of way. So we take this from some great research that was done by Harvard University a few years ago that found that physical mobility, transportation, the ability to connect to different destinations and employment opportunities is the single most impactful factor in allowing people to change their socioeconomic status. And so for people to escape poverty, to rise into other levels, they need public mobility options to do that and well-maintained infrastructure. We're driven by 5 principles that we've adopted as the core of the work that the department does. First and foremost, that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets. We think about this in a very simple way, which is that streets and intersections are very intuitive to use even by an adolescent. So if we can put the 12-year-old or 13-year-old that we love most out on our public streets, do we feel confident that they can safely traverse them in our city? Secondly, that every resident can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home, and they do not require a private automobile to do that. Very important, especially in this day, and that's really about access. All trips less than 1 mile are easy and enjoyable to achieve by non-vehicle travel. About 40% of the motor vehicle trips that are made in our city are less than 2 miles in distance. So if we can change that and make those short distance trips more attractive and easier to make without needing to drive and own a private automobile, which is a tremendous expense, that can really have profound environmental and equity considerations for us. Number 4, that no household needs to spend more than 45% of their income on basic housing, transportation, and energy costs. That is the upper limit. We know that our lower income residents have a much higher transportation burden relative to their income than others. We also know, at least pre-COVID, that housing prices are rising in our city, which in order to keep this equilibrium of 45%, it means that we need to do all we can do to lower the transportation costs for our households. And finally, that our streets reflect the values and pride of our city, so that the quality of maintenance, those that we prioritize who operate upon them, the environmental values, the community values that we have, the inclusiveness values that we have are all reflected in the way that we design and operate our streets and infrastructure. We oversee a tremendous number of assets and are responsible for quite a bit of the operations on the city streets. So just some quick statistics: 1,000 miles of local streets, more than 600 signalized intersections, 60,000 streetlights, 120 locally maintained bridges, 70 miles of trails and bicycle facilities right now. We hope to increase that. 800 plus sets of public stairs, hundreds of thousands of street signs, tens of thousands of pavement markings, 60,000 right-of-way permits are issued every year by the staff. We're also responsible for landslides, flood mitigation of certain sorts, traffic calming, and overall mobility planning and coordination with the other mobility providers in our city, such as the Port Authority. We do have a number, so if we page through the capital budget, which I encourage you to do, and I'm sure David does as well, it's great reading, you'll see that there's a number of different project areas that fall under the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure responsibility. So I wanted to share with you, which is somewhat new for us this year, some of the criteria that we're developing so that we know that this is going to be a very tight capital budget year and perhaps the next few years, that we want to be really deliberate in the projects that my department is bringing forward into the capital budgeting process. And so that we have a set of criteria to really weigh those projects very carefully within the different programmatic areas that we're responsible for. So I'll go through those somewhat briefly here, and then we can discuss it. Sorry, I need to move the video of you all. Bridges and retaining walls. So structural features are some of the largest and most expensive assets that we have. So looking at them, we have about 20% of our bridges are structurally deficient. That doesn't mean that they're unsafe to travel over. We keep them safe for your use, but it does mean that they're in need of some significant maintenance to really bring them up to par. So thinking about, of those 120 that we're responsible for, of the great many that require certain investments in them, how are we going to make these determinations? So we think about them in terms of which ones do need those critical safety upgrades, where, you know, a dollar spent today saves us thousands of dollars in the future. We look at those in terms of the asset condition, and we keep a very robust asset condition inventory, particularly of our large bridges. And we're getting better about understanding those small span bridges that we have, those that are less than 20 feet in distance. We think about the return on investment. So if the maintenance that we expend now can really extend the asset life of the bridge, that is a wise investment to make. Occasionally we do have some structures for which we really need to contemplate, is it worth that investment to maintain that asset? Or is it perhaps time to think about alternate routes and other ways, which is the last bullet. And then we also look at the vehicle volumes, excuse me, and the non-motorized volumes that are using. So a very heavily used bridge, particularly those that carry transit, those that carry a larger number of person trips on them, rank much higher in our prioritization rubric than those that are smaller. And again, this is in a financially constrained environment where we need to make those decisions. And those that have available alternative routes. So some of our bridges, if that bridge were to be closed, would require a very long diversion to get around it, and others there are redundant routes not too far away. And so we need to give that some consideration as well as we think about these. But these are generally large scale investments. Bridge and retaining wall investments are average, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars into the millions of dollars that we need to do even the critical safety upgrades on them. And they often are multi-year projects. So we'll need to design the improvements in 1 year to have the capital budget available in the following year for implementation. For planning and mobility, this is generally found under the complete streets project category in the capital budget. And so we look at where are we getting a density of 311 requests where there's clearly some community concern being expressed, looking at our crash and safety statistics of where do we see difficulties happening, looking at the traffic volumes that are in certain areas, the need for transit accessibility or improvement in transit service, freight planning and thinking about the goods and movements and freight corridor, on-street parking management, curbside management, and land use characteristics such as how many building permits are coming up in an area. That would be an indication of sort of changing land movements that might require a larger scale planning effort. These may be corridor studies, these may be neighborhood studies, these may be citywide strategic planning efforts, but trying to prioritize those efforts that we expend capital budget on so that we can really lay a sound foundation for subsequent decisions that we make, and improvements are all sort of hanging together in a well-orchestrated plan. Mobility and planning also then helps to advise across the board in all of our public investments how we are planning our investment program or those projects that we're advancing into this and looking at socioeconomic characteristics like the presence of schools, libraries, religious institutions, access to recreational facilities, grocery stores, health facilities, other critical destinations that we want to make sure that people have that very critical access to. Traffic calming is a sub-program of the Complete Streets program. It's one that was just introduced a couple of years ago that we began working on this, and has become highly in demand, really an indication of the quality of life issues that people are seeing in their communities. And so we have easily in any given year, we have about 20 times the number of traffic calming requests than the budget really permits. The good news about traffic calming is relative to projects such as bridges, the per project costs are can be quite less than a bridge, but there are a great number of them. Traffic calming projects usually can be both designed and implemented in the same year, depending on the complexity of the project. Some of them are better with a small amount of planning money in one capital budget year, with capital budget construction resources available in the following year. But these are prioritized first based on stakeholder input, although I will point out that some of our neighborhoods are much more connected to the systems of government than others. So we don't rely exclusively on stakeholder input. We do know that there are communities, particularly our vulnerable communities, who are less likely to raise concern in their neighborhoods than others. And so in those instances, we really look again at crash statistics, safety statistics, traffic volume, speed data. We do look at the cost-benefit analysis, and that cost-benefit, again, really relates to the vulnerable users first and foremost, because that's who traffic calming is about. So if they are proximate to schools where we have younger people traveling, if they're proximate to parks, if they're proximate to senior centers and centers of worship, these are places where we tend to see more people on foot, and we know that that's really where we can experience our more profound injuries. So as we think about prioritizing traffic calming projects and programming those, we try to look for serving first those more vulnerable populations, and really, so the more transit dependent populations, the more walk dependent populations, and the places that have a history of safety or speeding concerns. Safety is another component of the Complete Streets overall project area. And so there again, as we think about safety projects, that is driven by crash data, by actual evidence of safety risks. We can talk more about it in the chat session, but you know, we're looking more and more towards smart city interventions that would allow us, as we have cameras to control the flow of traffic at an intersection for our adaptive traffic signals, that maybe we can also use this kind of visual evidence to not have to wait for a crash to be reported, but that we can actually do some analysis of near misses and areas of conflict where perhaps we're not seeing the crash numbers, thankfully, yet, but we're seeing incidences of near misses where we would want to preemptively address those potential areas of concern. So getting off topic a little bit, but those that where we do have crash statistics, where we do have safety concerns, we look at things like sidewalk width. Is it in a business district or a well-used street where there's a density of pedestrians in that area? Are there other planned projects in the area that we can leverage off of and try and really maximize that investment? Can we integrate with bicycle and transit safety as well, and accommodation for those modes? We do look to stakeholder coordination, and again, that input through deliberative democracy sessions like this. Feasibility is a concern. Is there really an intervention that is meaningful that we can do here or not? Working with our sister agencies, such as the Department of City Planning, and then looking at things like the impact on parking. Signal upgrades and installs. Michael is here and can go on at length about the signal needs that we have, but again, 660 signals, a good number of them that could use major capital investments. We need to prioritize among them. So as we make determinations, we look at what is the condition of that asset relative to the rest of the inventory that we have. Are there a history of safety concerns in this area that we really need to address? The volume of travelers that are managed. Again, some intersections have a higher intensity of use, others a little bit less. Are there corridor operations that we need to keep into account, that we need to actually improve a series of signals in order to have the impact that we're desiring? You know, are we really giving some consideration of geographic distribution, because we do have a significant number of these across the city that are in need? Is there community support, particularly for new signals or change of operations in the signals? And again, concurrent investments. Where can we find some economies of scale? Where can we get a little bit more value for the investment that we're giving? Trails are an area, particularly not trails within parks. Those really fall to DPW to maintain, but trails that are more of the recreational trails, the commuter trails, the larger asset district trails that we have. So on these kinds of prioritization, we look to, do we have control of the right of way, or will we potentially be able to control the right of way? Is the topography appropriate for it? Does it lend to connectivity? Does it fill a critical gap that we have? What is the anticipated ridership of this, or the usage of this trail? We want to invest, of course, where we get the maximum utilization of it. Stakeholder coordination, the technical complexity of it. Is it something that we can build in the near future? Is it something that is going to take a few years, perhaps some planning up front, even before we get to design, before we should advance it? Is it consistent with the bicycle and pedestrian safety plan? And again, you know, we're really taking a strong equity lens to all of the prioritizations across here. Are there communities of need that really need that connectivity, that have more limited mobility options available to them? Flood control is a capital budget item. It's a bit of an unusual topic, because there are many different state entities as well as sort of, you know, regional watershed entities that are involved in this. But we do have capital budget for flood control. In this case, we do need to think about jurisdiction. Do we have the ability to actually alter or improve this waterway, and what aspects of it can we do to address that flooding? What is the actual impact of the flooding? What is happening as a consequence of it? Is it impacting critical roadways? Does it have a broader effect than just the local immediate area? Is it feasible for us to really address it, given the resources that might be available to us? Are the interventions cost effective that would be open to us? And are there cost sharing opportunities, which in a project like this is really important to us, because again, flood control projects usually are very, very expensive to implement, and they are lengthy projects. Start to finish on many of our flood control projects are about 5 years. Just for the level of coordination that's necessary, a lengthy design process, a lengthy construction process. We're excited about our public stairs. We hope that many of you are too. These are amazing, unique, wonderful, special assets that we have in the city, and there's a lot of them. And unfortunately, many of them are in need of more than a little bit of care and feeding. And so fortunately, David was a part of a activity that we did a few years ago, where we actually developed a rubric for prioritization of our public steps assets. And so as we prioritize these, we look not only to asset condition, does it need investment? Some of them are in better condition than others. But we also look at, does it connect major destinations? Is this the corridor that links a density of residents to schools or employment or high quality transit? Again, if this set of public stairs was closed, what is the alternate route that they would need to take? Sometimes it's a very short distance that they can still make the connection. Other times we can be talking about a mile or more if those stairs are closed, and that obviously is unacceptable when you're talking about pedestrians. We look again at equitable geographic distribution, because the need is so great. We do want to spread that out. And then just rough cost benefit analysis again. These are structures, many of them, and so we are talking about generally a larger dollar amount for a large scale improvement. So these our STEPS projects range from about $100,000 to slightly over $1 million for the STEPS projects that we've done now. Some of them can be done, the smaller improvements, railings and you know, a flight or a couple of treads of steps to be repaired can be done in the same year that investment is programmed in the capital budget. Others do require design work, and the design work usually takes 7 to 9 months. And so it's our preference to fund the design in 1 year and then fund the capital improvement in subsequent years. Street resurfacing, our much beloved asphalt streets are a very large investment that we make annually. This tends to be as much as we can carve out, as much as David and his team can carve out from all of the other demands of the capital budget to put into street resurfacing. We, as I said, have about 1,000 miles of public streets that we're responsible for. Best practice is to resurface asphalt streets every 10 years or so, which means that we should be resurfacing about 100 miles of streets a year to keep pace with sort of the degradation of that material. We really tend to average, for a long time, we were averaging only about 30 miles of streets a year. Last year, we were able to put quite a bit more money into it, and we were able to resurface over 65 miles of streets. So that can vary, but in even the best years, we continue to fall a bit behind in our maintenance. We determine those streets that we do put on the paving list based first and foremost by street condition. So does that street need to be resurfaced? We do look for equitable geographic distribution. And in this case, we mean equitable and not equal. We do try and put our resources in those districts that have a higher proportion of the poor streets of the city in them than we invest in the areas that enjoy slightly fewer poor condition streets. We rely on the input of DPW and their maintenance staff who are out on the streets all the time. We look at safety concerns. We look at water and drainage concerns that are often raised to us, and the nexus with other projects such as utility coordination, traffic calming, or complete streets projects. I should add that the street resurfacing program is not just asphalt, even though that's the largest portion of it. The street resurfacing program also includes investments in brick and blockstone streets, as well as concrete slab repair is all part of that same, as well as the pavement markings for restoration after street resurfacing or repair. Slopes and landslides. A couple of years ago, we had far too many of these. We still see several each year that occur. These are tremendously expensive projects by and large to mitigate. Anytime that a structure such as a retaining wall or an engineered slope is necessary to mitigate the landslide, we really are looking at $600,000 to about $1.5 million. So these are large scale investments that need to be made. And so again, we rarely can afford to mitigate all of them that come to us. In order to prioritize them, we look at, is there an imminent danger? Is this something that really is a risk to public safety or property if we don't mitigate it? Is there a hazard to the public right-of-way in particular? So is it compromising the ability to use a critical street or other facility? The impact on structures such as private homes, the complexity and the constructability. Again, can it really be mitigated? Some of these we can't. We look at the use of the roads. Some of them are impacting higher volume roadways, more critical connections. Others are more minor streets, and we need to take that into consideration. Again, we look at alternate routes. If we had to close this section of street, is there another way for our residents to get where they need to go, and what is the impact of that alternate route? And then again, the benefit cost analysis. What is the cost if we don't mitigate this landslide? Obviously, there's other costs that the city might have to bear, but are those other costs less than the cost of mitigating this slide? And so we put all of that into the hopper to try and prioritize those slopes that come in. And then finally, we do have a series of federal and state funded projects. And so these are our favorite projects, not personally, but from a budgetary perspective, they're our favorite projects because they're the ones that we only have to pay a minority of the money for. So bridge projects, large scale bridge projects like the Greenfield Bridge that's shown here, state and federal sources cover about 95% of the cost. And the local budget only needs to bear 5% of the cost. So these are lovely projects when you can get them. But again, there's a limited number of these that we really can advance into the programs that are available for us. And so we do need to prioritize our projects among them. These do have federally determined prioritization criteria that we need to look at, which includes highway safety performance criteria. Are they part of the national highway system? What is the performance of the national highway system route? And in this term, national highway system doesn't actually mean things like parkways. Certain streets like East Carson Street are designated as part of the national highway system, even though they don't look and feel like an interstate. Transit safety and asset management of transit. And then the Southwest Pennsylvania, I'm even forgetting my own acronyms. The Regional Planning Agency has their own investment criteria as they advance those. So we evaluate our projects against those. Southwest Pennsylvania Commission, sorry, I'm embarrassed about that. It's how often we use acronyms. And then there's a series of discretionary programs that are also available through federal aid. So CMAQ is a congestion mitigation and air quality program. SMART is a state-funded program that is aimed at sustainable infrastructure. The TA program is a federal program that is aimed again at more urban types of projects that are bicycle and pedestrian transit in nature and are a bit more less roadway automotive oriented and more alternative mobility placemaking oriented. And so for those, again, these criteria that are required criteria for SPC and PennDOT is to look at safety, congestion reduction, system reliability, freight movement, and economic vitality. In the world of the federal government, freight is economic development equates freight. It does not equate small local businesses, unfortunately, and then environmental sustainability. So I think that's all that we have. I guess I will stop sharing and turn it back to David.
Yeah, so now we're going to start our question and answer section of the program. If you have any questions for Director Ricks or Mike Maylock, you can type them out in the group chat. I've received 2 questions privately, which I'll go through in just a second, but I also wanted to make space for anybody who called in on a phone. If they have any questions, if you want to unmute and ask those now, I'll just leave a few seconds open. All right. So Director Ricks, our first question is related to traffic calming. They wrote that we asked for street bumps 30 years ago on Ophelia Street and were told that the city would not do them for fear of legal suits from damaged cars, which sounds like a very bureaucratic answer, so that's not that surprising. My initial thoughts, I have 2 on this one. One, there's a certain physics that needs to be satisfied when it comes to those kind of interventions, that there's certain areas where it may not be appropriate necessarily to have, especially on our steep streets, to have those kind of interventions. And then also, can you talk through any of the recent changes in technology that may have allowed us to assess projects differently or put them in places or maybe even try them out, like on Mount Washington, where we haven't had them before?
So let me first, we hear this a lot when we go out to neighborhoods about, well, I thought speed humps were illegal. They're not. I don't know the source of that sentiment that was that seemed to be prevalent some years ago. They are legal. There's certain design criteria that are meant. Speed bumps, little pro tip on the terminology, speed bumps are not legal on city streets. Speed bumps are what you might encounter in a rental car parking lot or the airport parking structure. They're very jarring when you go over them. They're short and definitely will take out your axle if you're not careful. Speed humps are gentler. They have a larger span to them and less of a grade, an immediate grade. They're not illegal. We can do them. They are also not the only traffic calming intervention that's available to us. And I think that they're, you know, when people think about traffic calming, they think they're asking for speed humps because that's the only thing that they know. There's a whole suite of different interventions that we can use, from different kinds of pavement markings to small vertical or horizontal diverters in the road, to other kinds of strategies. And so we urge you, if you are submitting for traffic calming, you know, articulate the concern that you want to have solved, rather than the intervention that you want. And so we'll send out our very talented staff, and they'll work with you to figure out what is the right intervention. But David is correct that speed humps do have some geometric limitations to them. They cannot be on very steep streets. We, you know, don't like putting them immediately after along a curve. There's other considerations. If there's a lot of transit traffic or emergency vehicle traffic on these streets, you know, that's not a very good experience for those users. So there are certain limitations to that, but the good news is there's other interventions that we can use. I'm not sure about the technology. We use all kinds of data gathering so that we do speed counts, we do volume counts, we do other kinds of data analysis before we propose what is the right countermeasure to use given the problem that's stated.
Yeah, I moved onto a street that's very popular with people cutting through. So I quickly turned into one of those kind of fish-shaking people complaining about those cars going too fast. I feel that pain.
And let me just remind you, let me take the moment to promote that we do have the neighborhood pace car program, because all of you, as you drive around the city, can be mobile traffic calming elements yourselves. You need only adhere to the maximum speed limit yourself.
Very true. The other private question I got was around curb cuts, and specifically one that was kind of around a bend. Can you talk about the safety considerations that go into decisions for curb cuts, and if there's any public input in that process?
The decision around curb cuts, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Correct. Yeah, if you can talk through the kind of safety factors that go into curb cut decisions, and if there's any public input in that process.
As far as the public input, I think it depends on what the nature of the curb cut request is. So we do have a curb cut policy that is draft at this point that we will be posting on the department webpage. In general, we try to minimize the number of curb cuts that occur on our public streets. They are points of conflict, either with vehicles entering or exiting the public roadway, but even more importantly, they are conflict points for pedestrians who are trying to travel along that point. And so first and foremost, we try to make as few of them as possible. And then secondly, we try to make them as narrow as possible so that area of conflict is minimized. And then we really look to see a number of other factors. If it is a property that has a number of different frontages along it, can we locate those curb cuts on the most minor street, preferably an alley, if that is available and functional in it? If not that tertiary street, then can we look at the lower order streets before we end up, you know, at the most impactful one? We look at topography and grade because there are just certain realities. We look at sight lines, whether, as to where that can be located and which frontage works there. We look at the volume of traffic because curb cuts are there for vehicular purposes. And so we look at the number, the volume of traffic that will be coming there. By and large, the public discussion on curb cuts should really happen through the planning and site review process. By the time that it gets to us, we'll weigh in on the technical aspects of it through the traffic impact statement of the origins and destinations and the travel flow of vehicular demands around an area, and if our intersections and streets can really handle that. And then we will look at it from a very, very fine-grained technical standpoint of, the curvature of the apron, the clear sight lines of the driver, really not things that we're bringing for public input. So again, most of the public input really should happen at the site review, site design review level through the city planning and zoning process.
Yeah, that makes sense. We had a question related to the capital budget. Where does one find the department's capital budget proposals? The proposals themselves are not published, but we do include a list of everything that was proposed in the capital budget towards the end. I'm going to try to share my screen. So within the capital budget, towards the end, we have some appendices. There is one that just lists all of the proposals that we received, and then also gives kind of the score for that proposal, sorry. So these are kind of the top ranking proposals in here, and out of the 5 people on the scoring committee for the capital program facilitation committee, 5 out of 5 people thought that was a really great worthwhile project to include in the budget. And this includes everything that we received, so you can see they kind of go down in descending order. So if you were looking for to see if a specific project was submitted, you can always just kind of Control F in the capital budget for that street name or that park name to try to find the information that you were looking for. Scrolling back up. How can we find out how much things cost so we can figure out what is and isn't able to qualify as a capital budget request? For example, things like traffic lights or an intersection upgrade. It's hard to make requests when we don't know how much a thing will cost. Do you want to talk, since we have Mike here, do you want to talk about the kind of variance we see, especially in signal projects?
Go ahead, Mike, and turn your video on so they can see you.
Yep. Sorry, it took me a second to find that. So signal projects are difficult to price. The variant in costs, I guess the short answer is you can expect a new traffic signal in the city of Pittsburgh to cost at a minimum $225,000. That's probably the best case scenario, depending on the price of steel at that time, as well as whatever underground utility conflicts we encounter during construction. I've been building signals in the signal for about 2 years now, and there's not one project where we don't encounter something that we're not expecting, or we have to work around, or we might have to dig 3 holes to find one that'll actually go down to the proper depth, rather than ideally, getting it the first time, just due to no one really knows what's underground. So traffic signals are a lot pricier than I think a lot of people expect them to be, in part due to those, the difficulty of building in a dense urban environment, as well as the newer equipment that's out there. Like, it helps us provide a better product, but it also generally costs more. And so the simplest answer is $225. I'm trying to think about incorporating more concrete work into some traffic signal jobs, and those I'm anticipating will come back with the cost of about $300,000.
And David, if I can just add to that a good number of our projects we have designed by consultants. We are a small staff, and so we do rely on outside contractors to assist us with the design. A good rule of thumb, what Michael is talking about, is the construction of a signal. So 225, although increasingly we're seeing very few of our signals come in at that price. So I think he might be lowballing it a little bit. But you do need to add about 10 to 12% on top of that for the design costs, just as a benchmark.
Yeah, that's an important detail to note. We got a question: what efforts is the city making to make sure information and surveys shared in these kinds of meetings are reaching as many communities as possible in different ways? To be honest, that's something that we struggle with. We're never going to have enough public outreach. We will always need help with that. If everyone from this meeting could share the survey on their social media, that would be a huge help to us, by the way. So it's challenging for us. We do work closely with the Office of Community Affairs. We make sure that we distribute the information to the mayor's of it, and they have that kind of relationship that they know when to really call in that favor and get input from the public. So it's something that's still evolving. We're open to further ideas, and please, anything you can do to help share the survey, we'd really appreciate it. There's a comment: overall, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure presentation felt very, very general, not a bad introduction to what DOMI does, but it doesn't give one a sense, let alone a real understanding of what specifically DOMI is proposing for the upcoming fiscal year and long-term planning. So Director Ricks, do you want to talk about any of the kind of big proposals you have on tap for the 2021 budget?
Well, for the 2021 budget, I think there's not going to be a lot of big new proposals. It will be, continuing to work through the list that we already have, the backlog of projects. So it will be, we hope, a number of important signal projects that Michael and his group will advance. We will continue our significant investment in bridges and landslide mitigation. We hope that will improve the investment in traffic calming. We will make a significant request for bicycle facility improvements this year. We do have, a newly completed bicycle master plan. And so we really want to get to building that out, especially in an environment like this. We understand even more how critical it is to have resilient mobility options. And so we do expect that we'll put that will probably be the largest single new type of request that we'll put in, is for a major investment in bicycle infrastructure, lots of stairs. So it's more of the same. We do not anticipate proposing grand new schemes right now, especially this will be a very back to the basics kind of budget year.
I will say it's important to note that DOMI is also, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, is also a really important project partner on some major projects, including bus rapid transit and the I-579 CAP. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the city of Pittsburgh that may be a county project, a state project, a sports and exhibition authority project, that they still rely on a lot of staff time from Department of Mobility and Infrastructure to be able to get done. So even if it's not included in the capital budget, because we may not be paying for it, there's still a lot of work that's happening on some of those major projects from the DOMI staff. Next question was asking about the status of DOMI's neighborhood traffic calming program and how does that tie into the 2021 budget. I know that they could always use more money. They spend that money actually really well. Especially we are working closely with Katie Sawyer from DOMI, who is doing an excellent job identifying projects from 311 and other sources and kind of working through those in a way that I thought was really responsive to community input. But Director Ricks, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add that may be specific to the 2021 traffic calming program?
No, I mean, the traffic calming is a very popular program. It's one that we would like to increase the investment in. I believe this 2019 budget, I'm going to quote it wrong. I think we only had about 200,000 that was set aside for the traffic calming program, which is really just, 2, maybe 3 projects and a handful of smaller interventions that we can do. So, we would like to be able to fund that program. Maybe $1 million a year would easily be able to be accommodated based on the demand that we have. But I want to say again, I think it's something where 311 requests alone. We have gone to the exercise of mapping our 311 requests. We know, again, that our vulnerable communities are not using 311 with the same frequency that various other communities are. So we are really, again, making a deliberate attempt to look at vulnerable communities, how we can invest in those and improve traffic calming investments there, as well as many other places. We won't do that exclusively, but being really deliberate in that investment.
Absolutely. We had a question from Heather who asked, I'm trying to get a fuller picture of your priorities with the listing of criteria and bullet points under each. Do each of those bullet points represent priority level? For example, you mentioned parking impacts as a factor under safety. It's mentioned at the end of the list. Does that represent a lesser priority?
No, not necessarily. They're not in rank order, although I will say that you're sort of seeing this prioritization strategy in real time as we're presenting it to you. When we were invited to be sort of the featured department in this forum, felt that it was a good time to start to introduce that work that is still draft. Parking is often, how parking can be impacted by a safety project is a consideration that needs to be taken into account. But the principal factors that we would look at for a safety intervention project are safety, and that may be at the expense of curbside parking spaces or other kinds of things. So it's a consideration. In that instance, it is the lowest consideration that we would look at. In other slides that you saw, they're not really I would not interpret them to be rank order of criteria, but rather the spectrum of things that we would look at.
Yeah, a lot of factors to consider. We had, I believe, an audio question from Pat Gianella. Pat, do you want to ask your question? I believe you're unmuted. Maybe not. Pat, are you there? Okay, maybe we'll come back to Pat. We also had a question from Chris. Is this a forum for suggesting specific projects to be pursued in the 2021 budget, or is this more of a broad vision discussion? The answer is both. The survey that we're going to go into a little bit in more detail after the Q&A.
I'm sorry that I got disconnected.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Pat.
I'm wondering, Katrina, Director Ricks, why hasn't the stop signs been installed on Grandview Avenue and Maple Terrace and Kearsarge? The community unanimously voted for these at several meetings, and you continue to ignore the wishes of the community.
I'm happy to respond to Mr. Gianella. There's rarely unanimity in a community, and in the Mount Washington community, there is a diversity of perspectives. We have made the best technical judgment possible for the concerns that were expressed by various stakeholders in response to the data gathering that we did on that corridor with respect to speed compliance. There is not great speed compliance on Grandview Avenue. It is a flat, level, straight street. We did do the temporary installation of speed humps and saw some good changes in the direction that we wanted there. It is our recommendation to proceed with those, and based on the consultation of the community meeting that you also were part of, we are going to proceed with those speed humps installation on Grandview.
Thank you, Pat. So just going back to Chris's question, it was around, is this forum about asking for specific questions or specific projects, or is this more kind of a broad vision discussion? The answer is both. At the end, we're going to go through the survey a little bit. You'll see that you have an opportunity to put down both types of responses. You can say, the corner of 40th and Butler, I really want there to be an audible signal for pedestrians. Or you can say, just in general, I really want to see better investment in things like sidewalks. So both of those options are available in terms of the input from the public to the capital budget process. A question from Barbara. Given the intense budget constraints at the moment due to COVID, what is the plan for redirecting budget for non-essential projects? I'm thinking in particular about the shuttle road through Shenley Park intended to connect CMU to Hazelwood Green Development. It's $9 million. The project provides no mobility benefits to residents today. It'd be great if this money could be redirected to support the very real mobility needs of the residents today. Director Ricks, do you just want to talk through kind of the factors that went into the decision making around that project?
So yeah, this is a long legacy project where we do have a rising large employment destination area, which is the reuse of the property known as Hazelwood Green. And we have the third largest activity center in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is the Oakland community, and a need to provide connectivity that, again, does not require the use of a private automobile to move between these two big generators and to support a land typology development on that new development site, which will bring substantial tax benefits, new jobs, new housing opportunities to the city that are good values to the overall needs of the city, that we do want to support a development type that is not auto-oriented. And this is one component of that need. We have expanded from the original scope of this project, which was exclusively a connector between these two activity centers. We have expanded that scope to make sure that it does penetrate into the community of Hazelwood, which also could use additional mobility options and additional opportunities to get to the employment opportunities presented by these two sites, as well as other critical destinations of healthcare, education, and other activities. So that project continues to press forward. Obviously, it's not without a diversity of opinions, as most of our projects have on it.
Yeah. We had a question from Sam. It's not explicitly capital budget related, but given kind of where we are right now, I do want to create some space for it. Sam wrote, with so much police violence being perpetrated in city streets across the US, what can DOMI do to make sure our Black neighbors can travel in and through our city safely? I'll leave some space for Director Ricks to answer that. I will say that one of the things that we've looked at in our office in concert with Director Ricks are things like street conditions and how do poor street conditions overlay with certain racial populations. And that was something that when Director Ricks first came to the city, that's something that Karina raised to me almost immediately. So those conversations are really important, but I also just want to give Karina the opportunity if there's any other kind of DOMI interventions on that subject that you wanted to talk about. That's a tough one, but I'm glad the question was raised.
I mean, it's tough and it's long overdue to really tackle these kinds of issues head on, and to really think about it, to really think about what do these investments do, both with the intent to make them safer and certain unintended consequences. I don't want to go too far off script, but Vision Zero is a concept of safety where no one dies or is seriously injured on city streets. It's a concept that was introduced in Northern Europe and has sort of seeded itself worldwide. It is based on engineering, education, and enforcement. And what we found here in the US is that as good as this intention might be of creating safety for everyone, it does introduce certain risks, particularly that enforcement aspect of it can, with good intentions for safety, have unintended consequences for our communities of color. And so we need to be very, very wide-eyed about those inherent biases that exist. What are those investments and those programs and those strategies that we're creating? How does it affect? We have to have those voices very present at our table and sharing the lived experience that they have, advising us of what are the interventions that can help make it safer for our Black neighbors to travel around the city. So we are looking at light equity, street light equity, something David has been involved in before I came here, looking at, do we have adequate street lighting? At the same time, there are certain areas where you know, we're trying to maybe overwhelm them with light for reasons that maybe to deter the presence of some of our communities of color. And so, you know, we need to be really, really careful about these. It's a great question. It's a longer city dialogue. I would welcome, you know, any opportunity to have that discussion and I think it's incredibly important this year to factor that into our budget making process and make some real changes around it. So would welcome the discussion. I do not have the answers. And I approach that question very humbly as to what can we do.
There's something you said earlier that I do really want to highlight. To paraphrase, sometimes the people most in need of help are the least able to ask for it. So it's really on us as city staff to be proactive in reaching out and finding out, like you referenced earlier, kind of the data points and not just relying on public input, because not only do some citizens have better access to things like this meeting than others do, but some council members just have different focuses depending upon the needs of their constituents. So there may be somebody who's really focused on food insecurity right now, and we need to do the work to make sure that their capital budgets are also met, that's not falling down, because there's a lot of work for everybody to do, and it's tough to kind of be on top of all those things at once. We had a question from Ross. Will this forum have a portion for comments, or will it only focus on questions asked in the chat? Ross, if you have a comment that you'd like to have shared with council or anything like that, you can always just put it in the chat and we'll be sure to distribute those out. Jonah had a question on $20 million in capital funds for, I believe, the police training center that's in the planning phase now. We have a meeting next week actually to talk about facilities. So we will keep this question, so we'll have it with the records for that meeting, but you're welcome to attend the facility meeting as well. You can come to all three. You just get sick of hearing my voice. Jonah also had a comment from Pittsburghers from Public Transit. And so we're going to note that comment, make sure that that's recorded and distributed to all the elected officials, as well as the other questions from this meeting. Thank you, Chris, for your comment. So make sure I'm catching everybody. Okay, great. So Elena had a question. Is anything being done for Oakland community regarding the private connector road since it ends at CMU in Panther Hollow?
Sorry, I was scrolling down so I could read the questions with you too. So this is from Elena's question.
Yeah.
So the Mon Oakland Connector project includes alterations to Boundary Street / Neville there, which is a very narrow roadway. It crosses over railroad tracks. It's, you know, by the Duquesne Electric station. It's been a very, very difficult corridor for bicyclists, and there is scarcely, if any, accommodation for pedestrians through that, leading to this section of park and to the trail. So a substantial portion of the investment, so it's a $9 million project. About have to look back at the project breakdown. It's between $2 and $2.5 million actually will be spent in that section of roadway to provide a pedestrian accommodation there. To we have implemented traffic calming, even though it's a very narrow street down there. We see people kind of you know, barreling through there in a shared roadway situation with other users, and so we put speed humps down there. We'll look at some even more robust traffic calming to manage that section of street. And so that is, you know, part of the benefit to the Oakland community that was requested as a component of that project. We've also looked at the other recommendations for connectivity, the maintenance of steps in the Oakland area, and some other priorities that Oakland Planning and Development has developed. I think it's about 2 years ago was their planning effort. We're also looking at and just getting underway with the Department of City Planning on a larger scale Oakland planning and transportation effort, because Oakland is a very dense, very complex kind of transportation network, highly pedestrianized. And so trying to figure out how can we intercept traffic before it gets to this very dense core of Oakland, so that we can restore some of those streets of Oakland for more pedestrianized bicycle uses, manage traffic better, manage parking better, and really create a more livable community there that I think has experienced changes because of the growth of the institutions there and growth of employment there. That is really long overdue for taking a holistic look at the transportation networks that support it, and coming up with some more sustainable solutions that can manage some of that congestion and safety concerns that are there.
Yeah, it's a very busy neighborhood. I want to say thank you to Barbara, Chris, and Ross for your comments. We're going to record those and share them with the elected officials as well. Are there any other comments for Director Ricks or for Mike Maylock from DOMI before we kind of go into what else you can do to help stay engaged in the capital budget? All right, so I'm going to share my screen for, I'm sorry. Okay, we got a comment from Anne. That's a good segue, Anne. We're going to show you how to input that information into a way that it's going to get to the department and the council offices. So I'm going to share my screen. So this year, for the survey, we actually are able to go digital. We set up a Google Doc. There we go. We set up a Google Doc where you can just give some basic preliminary information. One option is to discuss a specific project that you have concerns about. So you can go and say that I really want that light fixed at the T underpass. That's really important. That's something that we can then share with DOMI. They can do some investigation, or whoever the project department is can do some investigation, and then they can create that into a capital budget proposal. Additionally, you can get a better view of the mayor's budget priorities. All 9 are listed, no, I'm sorry, all 10 are listed on the Google form. You can go through and rate them from not important to important. That information we share in the capital budget as part of the executive summary for these meetings. And we also pass that along to the administration so that the mayor understands how the mayor's priorities match up with what the public really values. This form usually takes, I would say, less than 5 minutes to complete. It's pretty simple. We wanted to keep it really quick and accessible for anybody who had specific project concerns, or if they just had a general comment on what they wanted to see in the budget, this is a good option too. There are some additional things that we do with the responses. This is the old paper version that we used last year. In this example, we had we had comments on work needed for the Davis Avenue Bridge. We were able to share that with DOMI. This was a project that was already on their radar, but it lined up really well. And so we have some grants that we've pursued for the Davis Avenue Bridge. I think this is a good example of kind of how public comment can align with things that are already happening in the budget or give us new ideas. This is just a slide that shows the survey responses on the right-hand side from what we got last year. The capital budget is divided into 6 functional areas. You can kind of see those down the middle of the chart. In terms of 2020, the survey responses were distributed this way in terms of the types of projects that people wanted to see. This matches up fairly well with the actual planned spending in the 2020 capital budget. There's some tough ones in there. Vehicles and equipment, not too many members of the public are excited to buy pickup trucks, but that's just kind of the reality of what we need to do. So additionally, this is obviously not the last chance to get your word in on the capital budget or to learn more about it. One of the tools that we have that I really like a lot is called Bird's Eye View. We're gonna see if this will load. Being a little slow earlier. Bird's Eye View is a really great program that has multiple layers of city data. You can go through and see when there's been 311 requests in your neighborhood, police information, fire incidents, things like that. But also there's a capital budget layer that's this really light lavender, we'll say, light purple, that allows you to go into your neighborhood and maybe check out what capital projects are already underway. So in this instance, we had a capital budget project from 2018. It's got the budget information, and we also make sure that we put the status in there. So it's usually either planned, in progress, or completed. So feel free to check out Bird's Eye View. You can go around your own neighborhood and see the capital projects that are already budgeted, already underway. Additionally, we have a really great resource called Balancing Act. There's actually kind of 3 modules in here. The first one is what's called the tax receipt. So you can put in your income. If you have a home, you can put in the value of your home. And then it basically spits out for you an estimate. Oh, no. Oh. If you're ever wondering, this is exactly what my nightmares are like. So normally under better circumstances, this page would work. We'll try to come back to that in a little bit. But it gives you an itemized receipt of how your specific tax contributions to the city are. Okay, one more time. There we go. How your specific contributions to the city are actually dispersed both across departments in the operating budget, which is kind of this top section, and then also down below the capital budget projects, which includes things like the community development work that the URA does that we're going to talk about in a meeting next week. And then, of course, all the good DOMI stuff here. Additionally, at the very bottom, there's two more links. So one is an operating budget simulator and one is a capital budget simulator. These are kind of a little bit more involved version of the survey. You can actually go into the 2020 capital budget. You can move some faders around and say, let's do something DOMI. It's really important for me that we increase paving. You can change the faders to make changes to the budget. There's some background information in here on some of the specific projects. There are some scenarios built into there too. So you have the opportunity to make decisions like, yes, I actually want to upgrade 2 intersections with some new traffic signals. Each change or decision that you make in the software, though, does change the balancing of the budget itself. So any additions that you make to increase things, you kind of have to do what we do in our job and figure out a way to either decrease another cost, or you can also try to move around the revenue. There's some additional information in there about kind of how we pay for bonds and things like that. So this is a great kind of in-depth tool. Again, you have the Google form survey. If you just have like a quick hit, something that you want to let us know, specific project that you want done, or just a general area of concern. Balancing Act, though, is really great if you're looking for a deeper dive on how the capital budget especially is put together and kind of how to move things around to make decisions. You can also put comments in if you have anything that you want to say that, Larimer Avenue Bridge is really important, so it needs upgrades. You can save that, and then when you go at the end to submit it, it'll show up in the comments that we get back, and then we can share that with both the department and the elected officials. So that's another resource that's available to you. We also want to make sure that you understand your council office and council budget office, our office are always available. You can email us at this address, cip@pittsburghpa.gov. You can always go to 311 if you have any really pressing concerns about infrastructure. If you see something broken and it doesn't look like it's being addressed, feel free to use 311. And I think that concludes everything for tonight. I want to say again, thank you so much to our interpreter. Thank you so much to Innovation and Performance and also to the Community Office of Community Affairs. We're going to be, again, this meeting is recorded, so we're going to be sharing it on YouTube in just a few days. And then there's also those 2 other meetings next week where we're going to discuss facility projects and then also our kind of community projects, which includes the URA and the Urban Redevelopment Authority and a lot of our community development block grant spending. So I hope to see everybody there. Thank you very much.